School. It's nice to have everybody on board. Um, as usual, I got just a couple of things I'm going to go over before we start diving into your questions, and that'll buy a little time for some more people to sign on. And yeah, been off the last couple of weeks. Missed you guys. We did a little ad lib question answer session. Oh, I think a week ago Friday we probably did a little session and answered a bunch of questions. But yeah, we haven't done this in a couple of weeks, and it's nice to be back. There have been a lot of questions in the meantime, and it seems like all the questions are kind of centered on largely the same thing. And it's actually the same thing that I'm being faced with right now, and that is sun related problems, sunburn. A lot of questions about that. People have been sending me photos to look at, and yeah, it's that time of year. It's hot out there, and you know, climate change is real. It's getting hotter. 20 years ago, we weren't out there putting on sunburn protectants, and we cooled a few apples, but we, you know, largely we didn't cool apples. It's getting hotter. It's hot, and we're learning how to adapt. And one of the things we've done is shade gloss. We've got a number of those in some varieties that tend to sunburn a little more. And yeah, so today I just want to unpack a few of the tools that we use for sunburn protectant, since there were so many questions about that. First thing I want to talk about was cooling. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we're really blessed with a lot of water. We have the Cascade Range that gets a lot of snowfall in the winter, and so in the summer, we're in a drought season now, but you know, we have the mighty Columbia River and the Yakima River that are fed from these high mountains, and we have adequate water here in the Pacific Northwest, and that really helps. That gives us the ability to turn on cooling sprinklers to a large degree. We don't have cooling sprinklers in every block, but strategically where we can and where we can afford it, we do have cooling sprinklers. Those started, you know, those have evolved. Those started out in the old days with the old Rainbird R20s or whatever, the old brass sprinklers, and we really dumped a lot of water out on the ground using those old sprinklers. Then we kind of went to the Rotator series that rotated the R20s or whatever, and still those used a lot of water, but they've been effective. And we tend to alternate sets on those. In other words, we'll turn them on for 10 or 15 minutes, cool the apple down, and then rotate them. So those have been effective. We still have some of those out there. Largely, though, we've moved to micro sprinklers, small little R5 or R10 micro sprinklers. And lately, we've really been moving to foggers, a lot of foggers. The difference with the foggers is you have to leave those on. We don't alternate on those. We don't rotate sets. We just turn them on and leave them on. And a lot of that water evaporates, but they do a really, really good job of cooling. So that's what we're doing. We're cooling with water where we have our water, and we really want to bring down the core temperature of that apple. I went out yesterday and took a look at some blocks. Now, granted, the pump had went down, and it was 100 degrees, and I knew it had got hot out there. I was worried about this block, so I went out and looked at it. And you can see we took some pretty darn good sunburn, right? See, you got that right there. If you can see that, Marlon, got that in there? See there where we sunburnt those on the west side of the tree there, where you get that real intense afternoon heat. And so it was just a warning to me that probably in those blocks we need to get out there and get some more sun protectant on those. So I also wanted to talk about sun protectant real quick. There's several types of sun protectant that we use. And when you think of sun protectant, just think of like the sunscreen that you would put on your skin. A lot of these products are like that. One of the products that I've really evolved to that I really like is Parka. I use that on a lot of our colored varieties, and I really like that. It's a good product. It's not a wax, but you put it on the apple and it builds up, and it tends to protect the apple pretty well. If you want to get a little more serious about it, especially on our non-colored varieties, I like to use a product called Microcal. And it's kind of a kaolin product, the white powder that you'll see on apples. A real soft kaolin. I really like the Microcal. It works pretty well. A different product that would be similar to that would be Surround. A lot of people use Surround. They even use it as a sort of pesticide substitute in pears and even in apples. They'll put that on early season and dormant season to protect against parasitic and different things. So it has many uses. I've kind of moved away from Surround. I will use it, and I think some of the guys are still using it, but it's a little bit hard to get out of the calyx into the apple at the packing shed. And I kind of moved away from that just because I like Microcal quite a bit better. If you have organic blocks, Oasis O is a similar product that I like to use. The organic products are inferior to the conventional products, but so you have to put a little more on. But I like those. the way that I typically use sun protectants, and you have to be strategic in how you use them because they're expensive. They're expensive. This is an added cost that we didn't have this cost 10, 15, 20 years ago buying all these sun protectants. This is kind of new to us, and it's a huge cost. They cost a lot of money, and so you have to be very strategic in how you do those. In a product like Parka, you want to build that up on the apple over time. So you want to start when the apple's golf ball stage, smaller than that for sure. When the apple's golf ball stage, you want to start with that. Before it starts getting hot, you get a coat on. Come back in, 7 to 10 days, put another coat on. Come back in another 7, 10 days and put a third coat on. So I like to get 3 coats on everything, whether I'm using Parka or Microcal or Surround or anything. I think you want a base of 3 coats. I would also say that on the organic products, since they're a little bit inferior, I think on the organic products like the Oasis Out, you really need 4 coats. You need 4 bases. And that's what I use for the season. That's my base. Unless I get one of these giant heat events like we had this week where we're seeing temperatures 105, 106 degrees. Then what I would tend to do is I go out and I do what I call a west side and a border. We'll border the whole block because that takes the most intense sunshine. Within the block, it kind of shades itself to a certain degree. But the borders are really, really exposed and they'll get a lot of sunburn. So I always go back and do the borders and the west side of the tree. Where the sun is setting on the west side and the sun comes up in the east, sets in the west. So that intense sun on the west side of the tree, that's where that sunburn comes from. Every one of these burnt apples are from the west side of the tree. That's where the intense heat comes from. So what you can do after you get those 3 base layers on is just do what I call a west side and a border. Do the west sides of the trees and the border, and you'll probably be okay. That's been real effective. That program's kind of evolved over the years, and it seems to work pretty well. So sun protectants. What else? We talked about the shade cloths. We do the louvered type shade cloths. Again, those are on the west side. They're protecting that west side of the tree, that intense afternoon sun. So that's the protectants that we use. We use water, we use shade cloths, and we use commercial sun protectants to protect the tree. In my backyard, frankly, I use my garden hose. I go out there when I get off of work and I hose them down and I cool that apple down, and then I come back a couple hours later in the cool of the evening and I spray them down with cold water again, and I just bring down the core temperature of that apple. So that's what I do in my backyard. The other big question that came up this week is mylar. It's that season. We're going to start gala harvest tomorrow. We're going to be picking wildfire galas. We've been dabbling a little bit, but tomorrow we're going to jump in and the harvest is going to begin. Not on a huge scale. We'll probably pick 250, 300 bins tomorrow, something like that. But anyway, we're going to get our feet wet and we're going to get going. So yeah, one of the things I want to talk to you about real quick is mylar. What do we got? We got Eric Allenthauser's on board. Guadalupe Martinez, welcome. Bawisker is on board. Rajiv Kumar. Juana Bingas. Looks like we got a good group tonight. It's nice to have you on board. I wanted to talk about mylar. Been a lot of questions about mylar, and so just broadly I wanted to talk about mylar and how we use mylar. A couple of things that I've done this week is I posted a video of a mylar machine. And boy, that is a really good way to put out mylar. You're kind of limited in, you can only go as fast as that machine can go. It's probably moving at 3 miles per hour or something like that. It can move along pretty fast, but you have a hard time covering a lot of ground, so I like to get those out in the field and get them going. But when we really get into the harvest, we put out a lot of mylar, and the other way we do it is the crews will go out and they'll team up in groups of 3 or 4, and they've got that down to a science. We'll pay piece rate on that, so much a roll. I think we pay $75 or $80 a roll, and those guys will go out there and they've just got a system where they'll roll that out and they'll shovel that dirt on that mylar and they'll cut it off at the end of the row. And wow, they're really good at that. They've got a really good system of putting that out there. But we also put a lot of mylar out by hand. What else? One thing I want to mention about the mylar, there's a couple things about mylar. If you lay it down and you've got a lot of holes in the block, and those can even come from putting the mylar out. When you put the mylar out, they'll shovel dirt and put it on the sides of the mylar to hold it down so the wind doesn't blow it away. In the case of the machine, a disc throws a little dirt up on it, and that's what holds it down. But you want to be careful when the crews are out there putting the mylar out that they don't dig holes in order to put dirt on the mylar. They want to just skim a little dirt off the top, Because if they're out there digging holes, when your pickers get in there in 10 or 12 or 14 days, you're going to have a lot of twisted ankles to deal with. So you really want to watch for that. Make sure that they're not out there digging holes. That's something that seems to happen every single year. So be aware of that. The other thing is if you thin that block late and you've got big apples laying out in that block like these guys right here, you can imagine walking on that apple how it would twist your ankle. So you want to make sure before you lay the Mylar down, you don't have big apples out there left over from the thinning. And if you do, it's better to set a mower low and run through there and mow those off before you lay that Mylar down, because ankle injuries are a thing. They're a real thing out in the orchard. And I found that that's a source of a lot of them, is Mylar. Digging holes for Mylar and leaving those apples out there underneath the Mylar where people can't see them, they step on them, and they roll their ankles. So that's my advice on that. What else? Timing. Yes, a lot of questions about timing. On Mylar, I've always had a golden rule that you put Mylar down 10 days before harvest. And it's true this time of the year, I like to put it down 10 days before harvest. And the reason for that is we're cooling with the overhead sprinklers every single day. And when you're cooling every single day, after about 7 days, the reflective properties of the Mylar, they're gone. They're just absolutely gone. So you really want to time that right. It's expensive, so that you get the most out of it in that short amount of time. So my golden rule is during the real hot season, that's about mid-July to mid-August, I put it out 10 days ahead of the harvest when I expect to pick and color that apple up right at the end. When I get out of that intense heat period, the timing is get it out as early as you can. I really like to get it out early. And I used to say you didn't want to get it out too early, but I've learned in recent years with pink ladies later on in the season, the earlier you can get it out, the better. But the main reason that I can't put it out early this time of the year is the cooling sprinklers. They'll absolutely ruin it. Also, there have been questions about recycling the Mylar. That's a great question. It's a question we ask every year. Thought I had somebody lined up last year that was going to begin to recycle it. I think it would be a great deal for somebody that wanted to get into that. So far, we haven't found anyone to do that. So we're not recycling it. We pick it up. You know, by the time you pick that stuff up, there's not much left of it. There's just a little bit of that Mylar film. And one of the keys about getting Mylar up that I mentioned here a couple of weeks ago, you want to get it picked up when it's dry. After harvest, we have a crew of 4 guys that we just leave out there, and their job is to roll up that Mylar. So years ago, I invented what I call a Mylar machine. And I just invented it out of a wire spool. And it's kind of evolved over, I think we invented this thing 8 or 9 years ago, me and a couple of the mechanic guys and a couple of the manager guys. We built, I don't know, 15 or 20 of them. We built quite a few of them, and they've all evolved. The secret is to be able to roll up the Mylar and to have a way to pull the Mylar off the spool and leave it at the end of the row quickly. And so what we've developed is some spikes that are at an angle, and it rolls that up. And then you just pull a pin and you pop one side of that off, and it just pulls right off and you set it on the ground. So once you get them lined up, there'll just be a whole row of them at the end of every row, and it's real quick and easy to come along with a forklift or a small little bucket loader and scoop those up and put them in a dumpster. You want to do that early. You want to do that before you start running sprinklers on them and it starts getting rain and the tractor drives on them and they get muddy, because you pay by weight when you send those to the dump. We usually put those in a big dumpster, but if you pick them up when they're muddy and they're wet and you're paying by weight, you're going to pay about 5 times more than you need to. So you really want to get those picked up right away, right after harvest when they're dry, and do yourself a favor. Check out that Mylar machine. I put it on the page about an hour ago. Real simple to build. We built those in our own shop, and if you take a look at it, I'm sure you'll be able to build one yourself too. We invented that years ago, but help yourself to it. I hope it helps you. All right, we're going to jump into some of the questions, Marlon. What do we got here? We have Faciel Altair says, if I take a bare rootstock, 1 year old, say G41, and graft it with some variety, can I produce a well-feathered tree in 1 year? And what are your tips on it? That's a good question. And there's more to this question, but I'm going to answer this first part first. I don't know if it's realistic to think that you're going to get a full feathered tree in 1 year, because you're actually talking about the nursery process too. When I get a tree and I say it's a 1 year old tree right out of the nursery, it's actually a 2 year old tree, because it's been grown a year in the nursery. and they grow it up off the graft or the bud or whatever. And in that first year, it'll begin to develop feathers. But really, in that second year, you develop those really good feathers. So you might get lucky and get it in 1 year on a G41. It may be a little unrealistic. I think really you're going to grow it in the nursery for a year, and then that second year you might plant that out in the field, and that's where you're going to really get some good feathers. Hopefully it comes out of the nursery with really good feathers. If it doesn't come out of the nursery with really good feathers, what I like to do is just head that thing off at 32 inches. When I say head it, I mean cut it. Just cut the tip of it off from the ground up 32 inches. You want that thing 32 inches high, and it'll break real nice breaks right there where you want them, and you'll get a nice feathered tree. I hope that helps, Faciel. Latif Loam says 4 to 5 days rain. Okay, he's talking about cracking in fruit and heat, and I've looked at those pictures, and that's just heat. That's just those cell walls in that apple breaking down, and what happens is that those cells die, and that apple continues to grow, and those cells are dead in that area that's been exposed to that intense heat, and so naturally it cracks as the apple grows around it, and that's where that cracking comes from. So I hope that the presentation that I did at the beginning of the show will help you. I tried to show you some of the tools that we use to help us with that, whether it's shade cloth, whether it's cooling with water. You may not have water, but there are sun protectants out there that will help you with that. So hopefully the first part of the video will help you with that. Again, Yvonne has a question about fruit burning, same thing, several questions about that. So I'm going to move on from that. I hope that helps you with the sunburn. If you have any more questions about it, please feel free to post those. Raja IU says, how to use trellis system. Mention row to row distance. I have actually reached out to a couple people that I buy a lot of trellises from and do a lot of business with, and asked them if they would be willing to come on and do a little podcast on putting together trellises. This question comes up every week. I'm sorry I'm not going to answer it today because I'm just really not focused on trellises right now. When I get to the end of harvest, I'll truly be focused on trellises. But in the meantime, I have reached out to some friends and people that I've worked with over the year and invited them to have an opportunity to come on and talk to you guys about trellises and maybe sell you a trellis system if you want one. So hope that helps. We are going to visit trellises, and we'll get some information in the school section of this for you too. Junair Mid says, how to get fast coloring in Shingo Shina Gala apples. Fast coloring. You want to get good colored Gala apples. We've talked a lot about Apogee or paclobutazol, those growth retardants, so that you don't shade out the apple. That's a good way to do it. You start that way back at the pink. So if you want to get good color, you want to control that vegetative growth. That's number one. The other thing you can do is you can go in there, a couple weeks before you're going to harvest, 2 to 3 weeks before you're going to harvest, and summer prune those. Go in there and cut off that vegetative growth and get that sunlight into that apple. That should help. The biggest thing you can do to get color in those galas, and what I suspect is going on with a lot of people that follow the channel, is it's very important when you're growing a colored variety that you put on the proper amount of N, but not too much N. It's very important that when you get to ripening time, when you're, that 2 or 3 weeks before harvest, when you're really wanting that apple to ripen, you don't want any N left in the system. That's why I'm always talking about pulling back the end. You have, as good as you are at putting on in at the right time, you also have to be good at knowing when not to have in, because in can really hurt you. It can help you, and at the same time it can hurt you. If you're trying to ripen up an apple and get an apple to color, and you still have a lot of N in the system, it's just not going to happen. That apple will absolutely stay green. So you want to learn to apply in a way that you can have it out of the system by the time you're ready to pick that apple. That's why I really like fertigation. I do a dry mix in the wintertime, and by May it's already worked its way out of the system, and then I'm just spoon feeding fertigation as the plant needs it. But in a week it's already taken up and it's gone and it's out of the system. It's not down in the soil, and it's not going to hurt me at harvest. The other thing, Mylar, we just talked about Mylar. Get some Mylar down, or some Extend-A. It's one thing I forgot to talk about. Some people were bringing up, why don't I use Extend-A? I do use Extend-A. I use a lot of Extend-A, but it's really expensive. Extend-A is that weaved white fabric that they sell. I use Extend-A for Rainier cherries and for apples. but it's just kind of cost prohibitive. I wish I had a lot more of it, but I don't. So I think as the years go by, we'll continue to buy more. But yeah, Extend is a great product. I wish I had more, but it's just really expensive. That's why I don't use more of it. Finally, how can I get color in a good Gala apple? Well, cool nights and warm days. That's how you get good color in an apple. You just need those cool nights and warm days. So that's what I know about color in apples. So I hope that helps. I hope there's something in there for you. One question that comes up, Marla and I are we were talking about this evening because this question comes up every week. And it's about root rot or phytophthora in apple plants. And I'm not an expert on this, but I've had to deal with it over the years. I always say the same thing: choose the right rootstock. Stay away from those, those ones that are prone to phytophthora. The M9 and the 111 and the 26, and some of those older rootstocks that are prone to phytophthora. Try to avoid those if you can, if that's possible. You really want to have good soil drainage. Don't oversaturate the soil. Trees do not like wet feet, so make sure you have really good drainage. 2 products that you can use that come to mind. They're expensive, but they work. Ridamil is a really good product for phytophthora, and Linebacker is another product that I use for phytophthora. And sometimes you'll have to use those 2 or 3 times a year. You want to get the timing down on those right, because again, they're expensive, but they do really help. I hope that helps. Prick shit, rat hole. Oh, I think that's a phony name. We're going to skip the name on this one. How to make the tree trunk thick. I have Gala on M9, but very thin leader. I think the only thing that's going to make that thick is time. Those are going to grow as big as they're going to grow. But if that's an M9 and it's just been grafted, it's going to be small. It's that's a semi-dwarfing rootstock, and it's going to be small for a time. But in time it will grow. But it's not going to get very big. If you're looking for a big leader, on an old standard apple tree, it's never going to get that big. I still have M9s out there, and the trunk on those are probably 6 inches, maybe 9 inches on a big tree. They just don't get that big. So I hope that helps. Museba says, how can I minimize rusting and sunburn in Shinnecoe Red Gala? Also, what's the best strategy to increase fruit size in Shinnecoe? What nutrition program is Proman recommended for fruit size? I talked quite a bit about Proman last week. Also on Galas, you can use a thinning product called Maxell during the petal fall when you're thinning on those. So yeah, Proman at the bloom time, it tends to make a elongated Gala. I'm not sure you want an elongated Gala, so I kind of stay away from Proman on Galas. I use those more on a Red Delicious or something where you want an elongated apple. I think most people that I know use Maxell on Galas. It'll make it bigger. Use that at petal fall time. But you want to avoid rusting. That's kind of your big rusting. I always say you want to spray in good drying conditions. Never go out there if there's any sort of wetness out in the field, or if the sprinklers are running, or if there's a dew in the field. You want to make sure you have good drying conditions. In other words, even if you have just a real high relative humidity and you're going to spray that tree, and that tree is going to take 3, 4, 5 hours to dry, you want to wait. Because that's what happens is that spray sits on that apple, or even worse, the flower, because it'll settle on the bottom of a flower, and really that's where rusting comes from. Avoiding caustic mixes of copper and some sulfurs. You want to be really aware of what you're spraying on. You want to really be careful what you spray during bloom time. Some of those foliar sprays you do during bloom time can do a lot of damage and cause rusting. But mainly spray in good drying conditions. That's my best advice. There are some chemical products that you can use to help with rusting. We've talked about Manzozeb and a couple other products here in the last couple weeks. I think you can go back 2 weeks ago and we talked about that at length. So I hope that helps. Yasir Nabi says, in Kashmir, we're facing cracking issues with this variety. What could be the reason? Just talk about that. Heat stress, it breaks down the cell wall. Apple continues to grow around it, and so that apple cracks. So yeah, that's what that is. Shabir Dar says, how to increase size in Kulu Delicious apple. Again, thin early, space out the fruit. Make sure that when you thin, you're spacing that fruit a fist apart so it has plenty of room to grow. Proper irrigation. That's the best thing you can do. Never, ever, ever let that tree get stressed out hold that water capacity at 80% of soil moisture capacity, and keep a healthy, happy tree. Also, I would mention it all starts with pruning. Make sure you do a good pruning job. Remove all that downward wood in the tree, any sort of a pendant branch. Those are going to give you small little apples. So pruning is where it really starts. When we get to pruning, I'm going to talk about that a lot more. If you go to the school, you'll be able to, just a second. If you go to the school, you're going to be able to see some videos on pruning, and I talk about that in every single video. Downward branches and pendant branches lead to small apples. So starts in the pruning. So I hope that helps. What you got? Dongashi 9489's on board. Rohit Nagi's on board. Arjun Donita. Fernando Medina from Chile is on board. And Rohan Chauhan is on board. Hey, before I move on, I wanted to touch on the topic of the Cosmic Crisp. Been getting a lot of questions on Cosmic Crisp. And people kept saying on the channel that they were in India and they were growing Cosmic Crisp. And I kept thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe they had some sort of a special license or something. We're able to get a special license. But I've seen a lot of commentary on that. But to be honest with you, I kind of doubted whether you had Cosmic Crisp in India. And I learned this evening about an hour ago. Marlon pulled up an article, and I learned that there are Cosmic Crisp in India and a few in New Zealand. Sounds like they've given out 2 special licenses. Is that right, Marlon?
Like several.
Several special licenses, but 2 of those areas for sure are India and New Zealand. So it sounds like there are a few licensed Cosmic Crisp in India. So I stand corrected on that. Congratulations. Let's see. We talked about that. Dar Shiraz says, sir, what about Wildfire Fruit Drop at 5,200 feet elevation? I assume he's talking about Wildfire Gala. Wildfire Gala is a pretty good apple. I've been showing some pictures of Wildfire the last few days. It's our very first variety of the season. It's a very early apple. The thing about Wildfire that is the negative of Wildfire is it tends to get soft real early. But I've learned how to overcome that by just doing a half rate of retain about a couple of weeks before harvest. I'll go in and do a half a rate of retain on Wildfire Galas, and they'll be just as solid of an apple as any other Gala. They really hold out really, really well. So one of the things that I've learned to use on Wildfire Gala is a half rate of retain 2 weeks before harvest. Does that apple a lot of good. Why do you drop 5,200 feet? That's pretty high. I don't have any experience growing it that high of an elevation. That's pretty high. But one thing that you could consider is there's a product called NAA, otherwise known as Stop Drop. And you can also spray that on a couple weeks before harvest. NAA is the name of that. And it should tighten up those stems and keep those from dropping. Also, check your water. Always look to your water. Make sure those trees aren't getting stressed. But Stop Drop, NAA, that's what I would recommend to you. Try that. Barcott Fruitfield says, on your first video, how to prune apples, what's the difference between row to row and the difference between tree to tree? I get that question a lot. Everything that I grew up until about 10 years ago had evolved to a 10x2 system. That doesn't mean that I didn't have a whole host of other systems out there, but what we were planting and what we were actively doing at that time was all 10x2 system. Everything that I've been doing for the last 8 or 10 years, I've gone to 12 feet by 2.5 in the row. So 12 foot wide by 2.5 in the row. And that's really kind of what I've evolved to get the maximum amount of sunlight into the tree and the maximum amount of crop load with the expected size that I want, the target size fruit that I want. After 60 some years, that's where I've landed. 12 by 2.5. That's what I would recommend. If you were going to do a vertical trellis, you could argue about a 10-foot row. Could possibly be better, but for sure on a V trellis, I would do a 12-foot row. And frankly, on a vertical trellis, I would do a 12-foot row also. 2.5 feet, depending on the rootstock. If you had a Bud 9, I'd put them closer together. But if you're growing a Geneva 41 or Geneva 11 or an M9 or something like that, I would put them 2.5 to 3 feet apart. Hope that helps. Ajay Thakur says, I can't get proper growth on my leader rootstock M9. I applied all types of fertilizer. What should I do? I had a video at the beginning of the year of speaking of Bud 9, some Cosmic Crisps that are on Bud 9. We had trees all around it on Geneva 41, we had Geneva 11, we had 890s, we had 969s. We were in the 4th year of production last year, and all of those other blocks were producing 80, 100 bins per acre. But those Bud 9s, they weren't even in production on them, but we couldn't even pick them. They were sorry, and they were lucky if they had 20 bins to the acre. They all fell on the ground anyway. And we knew that, I mean, the problem was for Bud 9, we planted them too far apart. That was the issue. We should have moved those things closer together. Everything else was at 2.5 feet, so we planted them. Anyway, we should have put them closer together. So this year, and this is the answer to your question, this year we went out there, and of course we're fertilizing them, and you said you're already doing that. You're pouring the fertilizer to them. But what we did is we went out there and we slicked those trees off. We took off every single branch on those trees except the leader. And not only did we do that, if the tree was giving us a real strong sucker, we cut the entire tree off and went to the sucker, the strong, dominant sucker. A tree will tell you which branch is dominant. There'll be a strong limb that breaks off, especially when a tree's trying to shut down. It's a survival mechanism for a plant. When you see suckers coming up out of the ground or a tree shooting off sucker, it's a survival mechanism. So those trees were tending to give us big, strong suckers, so we cut them off and we tied that thing up. And all throughout the year, 4 or 5 times so far, we went in there and did what we call pinch and channel growth. We've got a lot of videos on that back in April, if you want to go back and take a look at that and look at the school. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to concentrate all the energy of that tree into the central leader. So you need 2 things. You need a string tied all the way to the top of the trellis so that thing can chase that string up the wire. And as it's growing up the wire, if it grows 3 inches, you tie it. If it grows another 3 inches, you tie it. Because if the wind blows that thing, it'll stop growing. So just keep it tied to the central, and every time something starts to grow down below it, pinch it off and channel that growth into that leader, and you'll get those trees to the top. Worked for me this year, so I hope it works for you. That's what I would do. Niraj Shahan says, which apple rootstock is used mostly? Best apple rootstock for Gala. Well, I'll be honest with you, I have more 337s probably than anything else, because again, 10, 15 years ago, that's what we were planting. We were planting a lot of 337s and Bud 9s and M9s, frankly, and M26s. But everything that I planted in the last 10 years has been on a Geneva rootstock. So what do I have mostly? Probably Geneva 41. Second to that, probably Geneva 890, followed by Geneva 11, and whatever else after that. But predominantly, we have a lot of Geneva 41s, a lot of Geneva 890s, all Geneva rootstocks. I hope that helps, Niraj. Abdul Kalamov says, summer pruning is the perfect for the managing of next year's fruiting branch and buds, but it will spread Erwinia amylavora, it's bacteria. How do you disinfect your pruning tools? Well, that's a good question. That's a concern for us earlier in the season when we have fire blight or whatever, and the temperatures are a little bit cooler, and that can be a real problem, cutting fire blight or whatever. Typically what we'll do in a fire blight scenario is when we get to the end of the row, we'll dip our pruners in a bleach solution and disinfect them, and every row we'll do that. We used to do that every single tree. We really don't do that anymore unless you're cutting into an active canker and it's just obvious. We'll bleach those things. But the good news for us is the temperatures are high enough that we really don't have to worry about it, because the bacteria doesn't spread this time of year for us here, so it hasn't been an issue. But if it is an issue, you're definitely going to want to disinfect those tools. Honey, will you put those dogs out? They're just too distracting. Bella, get out. Okay, free paid softs. Hello, I am from Pakistan. Unfortunately, many apple orchards still rely on old practices and limited varieties with Mondial Gala, our main commercial cultivar. We want to modernize our orchards by adopting the latest apple varieties, rootstocks, high-density planting systems, and advanced orchard management techniques to improve yield and fruit quality. I would greatly appreciate any guidance, recommendations, or resources that can help us move toward modern apple production. Thank you. Man, if you was here, I'd have you work for me, free paid softs. That is That's great. That's the same thing that all of us are trying to do, and you've landed in the right spot because that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to help up and coming growers and trying to teach you how to grow, professional commercial orchards. So I hope this channel helps you. Stay tuned. Click that follow button. Stay tuned. We've got Ryan Tyrell is on board. Nice to have you on board. Mitch Songa for Fresno, California. It's nice to have you on board. Virtuous Noman Sufi. I recognize that name. Nice to have you on board. We've got one more question here, and we're going to turn to the listener questions. Sanjay Mehta says, "Sir, can you share your fertigation schedule for Gala Block in a year?" 3 weeks ago, I shared my fertigation program with you. You can find that in the school. SKOOL.
Subscriber Hub.
Doesn't get, oh, Subscriber Hub. Click on the subscriber button. I think that costs you 99 cents to be a subscriber.
Yeah.
Anyway, we don't care about that. Click on that subscriber button and you're going to find my fertigation schedule in there. If you go back to the video 3 weeks ago, though, I talked about it. I laid it all out for you. You can listen to it there. So I hope that helps you. Just shared that in completion. Oh, there was one more question that I wrote down that I just happened to read right before I signed on. And it is Derek for Apples. I like that name, by the way. That's a pretty cool name. Derek for Apples says, "I've been using a dissolved urea for my fertigation. Is that bad?" No, it's not bad. Urea is great. The fact is, I used to use a lot of urea, still use urea, and it works great for fertigation. You have to be careful with it. I know you know that, Derek. It's got a lot of salts, and I had an orchard one time. It was a 300-acre cherry orchard, and I bet we lost 20 acres of that orchard because long before I'd ever got there, they just fertilize, cherries, they use a lot of N. And they just use urea, for years and years and years, 80, 100 pounds per acre of urea every year until they really, really built up a toxic salt layer. And salts really can be toxic to the tree. And if you overuse urea, you will build up salts. The other thing I wanted to mention is I was thinking you were from Michigan, but I looked on your profile right before I signed on. Sounds like you're in Canada. Just because the reason I looked, I wanted to see where your cutoff was for fertilizer, and I would expect that you're probably pretty cold in Canada. Where did it say you were from? In any case, if you're going to get cold, if you get those cold Novembers, you're probably going to want to cut that urea off pretty soon, Derek. You can see real substantial phloem damage. What I like to do so that I can use it all up is after I cut off the urea or the N, the middle of February or summer solstice when you want to cut that off, because then the plant will begin drawing reserves back down to the root system. After that, I go to humic acid 6%, and it'll break down the carbon molecules in the soil and release whatever N or elements that are in there that you don't want to leave laying around in the soil. You want that plant to use that up and take it back down into the root system so you have reserves for next year. And use up whatever you can this year. So that would be my best advice. But no, Derek, there's nothing wrong with urea. Great product. So. Okay, Barton says we're live in school, Facebook, YouTube. Let us know where you're watching. That's always fun. I look where you're from. It's because it's important. It matters when I'm trying to answer your questions. It makes a difference where you're from, and part of it is if you're in a different time zone, a completely different time zone. I need to talk in terms of timing of the tree, not timing of the year, because we could be on a complete opposite schedule. For instance, with New Zealand and Australia are probably in the dormant season right now. So it's important that we talk in those terms, and we'd like to know where you're from. So please let us know. Click that subscriber button, that follow button. That really helps us. We thank you. Furtis Ahmad Sufi says on Mylar, how does it help in color development? How much potassium does M9 plantation need in the third leaf year, having 70 fruits per tree? Well, how does it help in color development? Let's start with that. On Mylar, what it does is, at whatever angle that sun is reflecting during the day based on the angle of the sun, whatever angle that is, when you have Mylar on ground, in the opposite, but in the same angle, it's going to reflect that light back up into the tree. So where does it end up reflecting to? It ends up reflecting to underneath the tree, the underside of the branches and the underside of the fruit that aren't getting that downward sunlight. So when that light reflects back up at that same angle on the opposite row, you're coloring up the bottom side of those angles, and it really works well. So if you haven't used Mylar, I would suggest you try it. Works really good. Any sort of white fabric will work pretty good too. Um, how much potassium? Well, you really need to look at your soil sample. If you have adequate potassium in the soil, you probably don't need any. I normally need a little potassium here where I'm at. I like it. I like potassium for root development. I like it for helping to color apples, and the tree needs a certain amount of this element in the soil. I typically put on 30 pounds of potassium a year. I like to put on 50. The problem is it's cost prohibitive. It costs a lot of money. So I put on in the range of 30 to 50 pounds, but it might be completely different based on what you have in your water. We have orchards where we don't put on any potassium because there's plenty of potassium or K in the water. So it depends on how much you need. But if you do need it in large quantities like we do, for me, again, it's cost prohibitive. So just cost wise, I put on 30 to 50 pounds a year. Hope that helps you. Eric Alderhauser says, my leaf analysis came back low in calcium plus magnesium. I'm foliar spraying calcium, but not the magnesium because they are antagonistic. And that's true. Should I delay magnesium until fall? Yes. I've learned a few years ago that I'm not completely spot on with this, but it's always worked for me. I try to do my metals in the fall. I do some magnesium in the pink, but I also do it in the fall. But if it's binding up the calcium, yeah, I would do it in the fall. I think that's your best bet, Eric. Hope that helps. Rohan Shahan says, when to apply Ethereal for return bloom? I like to apply Ethereal with petal fall spray for thinner. The other time that you can apply Ethereal for return bloom is 45 days post full bloom. 45 days after full bloom, you can apply Ethereal for return bloom. Be careful about your customer base. Some customers don't want that later Ethereal. They're fine with the earlier Ethereal, but not the later Ethereal. We're talking about Ethereal. We're talking about Edifon is the real name for that. But yeah, that's time. 45 days post full bloom. He also says, I have some plants of Cosmic Crisp. I have frost sensitive issues. Boy, you're not just kidding. Cosmic Crisp are sensitive to frost. I've learned that the hard way. I lost about 30 acres Cosmic Crisp last year to frost in a late season incident when we already had a good sized apple. Frost came in there and boy, they really got nipped and it left a terrible russet on them and they were just no good. So make sure you have good drainage in that block and make sure you have a means of frost protection because you're absolutely right. I learned that last season the hard way. We put in some extra heaters this year, fixed our drainage, and turned down our startup times for the wind machines. In other words, we started earlier in those blocks, and if we even thought it was going to be cold in a Cosmic Crisp block, we turned them on, especially if there was any moisture out there, because yeah, they are very sensitive to frost. Learned that the hard way. Mitch Songa from YouTube says, what's a good tree spacing for cherries in Max 14? I don't have any Max 14 anymore, but I've had them in the past. I like to plant all my cherries on 8x16. So, and I think that's a semi-dwarfing rootstock. But 8x16, that's my recommendation. I do most all of my cherries at 8x16. I might move it out in the row if I was afraid they were going to be too big. I might move it to 9 foot in the row by 16 foot. But I found if I get more than about 16 foot wide, I'm just wasting space and I have a hard time getting production. So I like 8x16. I think that's 340 trees to the acre. Let me get a drink here. Hortitrail Roots to Fruits. I like that name. What are the best practices to control excess vegetative growth and minimize alternate bearing in a seventh leaf Gala orchard? Okay, seventh leaf Gala orchard. He wants to control vegetative growth, so you're going to want to take a look at soil samples. Make sure you're not putting on too much N. It could be that maybe you just want to pull back the N for a year. So you can do that. Start by reducing the N. Make sure you pull your branches down. That'll tend to settle that tree down. Pull those branches down. If you can, set a pretty heavy crop on it. Nothing takes the vigor out of a tree like a lot of apples. That will take the vigor out of it. Beyond that, we've listed a whole host of tools in the school that range from root pruning that you can use to settle a tree down, deficit irrigation you can use to settle a tree down. Instead of pruning in the dormant, you can prune it in summer pruning after summer solstice. That will be a deinvigorating cut. That will help settle the tree down. And in some very extreme cases, I have some organic gailers that are much older than that, that we've had to score. That we've actually had to score the base of the tree. That'll help kind of reduce that alternate bearing and settle that tree down. So there's a lot of tools that you can use. I would start with my fertilizer and make sure I'm pulling back that in, pulling those branches down, and consider not pruning in the dormant, and maybe waiting a little bit till you get past, somewhere between bloom time and summer solstice. If you can prune in that area, the closer you get to summer solstice, the more deinvigorating it will be, and it will take vigor out of that tree. I hope that helps. Derek 4 Apples says, yeah, I just answered that. That's that question that he had about urea. Just talked about that. Thank you, Derek. Sumish Verma says, pruning tips for traditional Red Delicious mature apple plants that are not producing, but they are growing and not producing much fruit. I had a Red Delicious block that about 7 years ago, I mean, it had been producing 90 to 100 bins per acre every single year for years and years and years. And then it froze out a year, and it kicked it into alternate bearing. And it has taken us the last 3 or 4 years to get it back in its fruiting cycle. How did we do it? The things that we just talked about. Instead of pruning in the dormant, we summer pruned it. We thinned early, and even if it had a super light crop, we got in there with blossom thinner, and we thinned that thing early, and we got that fruit off of there. And we pulled back the end using all those tools. We've been able to get that back in production. So you really want to thin early, and if you want to reduce that vigor, you want to pull back the end and consider summer pruning, where you can take the vigor out of that tree. Sagla Mushtak says, how to increase the size of delicious apples when we have 40 days to harvest. I don't mean to laugh. If you see 40 days to harvest, I assume you're talking about Red Delicious apples. One thing you can do with Red Delicious apples, the reason I chuckled is you're just a little bit too late. At bloom time, at about 80% full bloom, you can use Prolin or Type on Red Delicious, and it will give you a bigger apple. It will elongate and it will get bigger. You only have 40 days to harvest, so there's only one tool that you're going to have at your disposal. Number one, water them correctly. Don't let that tree become stressed, because the only thing you're going to do at this point is take away from the size that apple's already decided it's going to be. In other words, at this point, a small apple is going to be a small apple, and a big apple is going to be a big apple, as long as you don't mess it up. Do anything to detract from that, like stress the tree or not give it ample water. So make sure that you're irrigating correctly. The only tool that I'm going to offer you at this point, 40 days before harvest, is considering using some sort of mechanism to delay the harvest. That could be retain, might delay the harvest by 3 or 4 days. Harvest is a product that we use as a harvest logistics tool. You could probably put Harvest on those things and hold off the harvest for 7 to 10 days, giving that apple a little bit more time to grow. So that's a couple tools I'm going to offer up to you. But really, when you get to 40 days to harvest, that apple's already decided how big it's going to be. But those are a couple tools that you could use to get a little more size out of those. I would mention that we have some technology also that helps us with that a little bit. We have a system called Phytech, and we can plug in the size of apple that we desire, and it has all kinds of sensors out in the block. The timing that we expect to pick it, plug in the full bloom date, and it will give us irrigation recommendations based on how to get that apple to that target size. And what we found, like in Pink Ladies, when we're trying to grow a bigger apple, I've always thought that just turn the water on and pour the water to it, and you'll grow a bigger apple. But I've learned through this technology that's not always the case. There are tools that you can use with technology that will tell you that instead of pouring the water to that apple, go out there at night and turn the drip on for 2 hours and pulse a little water to that apple. And you'd be amazed. We've used that and had weekly meetings to get blocks to a target size that were struggling, and it really worked. So there's some technology out there that might help you also. Ari Ayala, I recognize that name. Shaky Branch Honeybees with us. Nice to have you on board. Neil Shandil's on board. Rohit Nagil's on board. And Balpreet Gill. Welcome. It's nice to have you on board tonight. Micah Mike, 2265 says, how much do you use of calcium chloride per hectare? I don't really talk in terms of hectare, but I do talk in terms of acre. Um, I think we're applying 5 or 6 pounds of calcium chloride, um, maybe 4 times a year. So not a lot, 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds. I would also say in terms of calcium, on anything that's bitter pit sensitive, like a honey crisp or even a cosmic crisp or an envy, anything that's tend to get green spot or bitter pit, I do 1,000 pounds of gypsum in the fall and 1,000 pounds in the spring. Just automatic. We'll go out there and we'll spread 1,000 pounds post harvest and 1,000 pounds in the spring to get calcium in the soil. In addition to that, following bloom time, when we go to fertigation, I like to do 3 or 4 injections of calcium through the fertigation, through the drip line. So those are the different modes that I'm using or mechanisms that I'm using to get calcium in the system. I apply gypsum, I broadcast gypsum, and I buy it in bulk, just a big pile of gypsum, and we'll take it out there and spread it at 1,000 pounds per acre. Then we move to the fertigation. I like to do 2 or 3 or 4 applications of a fertigation. But we find that 45 days post bloom, the mechanism between the phloem and the xylem changes, and you're really not getting calcium to the system. It's ineffective. You're not going to get calcium through fertigation at that point. Then you have to switch to the foliars. So 45 days post bloom, I switch to foliars. I don't make any special trips through the field anymore to spray calcium. But if it mixes well with something else, and we're going down the row anyway with a sprayer, I'll throw it in. I like to get on 3 or 4 foliar applications of calcium chloride. And that's what we do. I hope that helps. Sarah Coates says, how do we procure this sterile moss? Talk to your field man. I get mine through my field man, but I think they're grown in Penticton, Canada, if I'm not mistaken. I think that they're kind of grown in a lab up there, and we have to put in our order 6, 7, 8 months ahead of time. We have to order these things for the following year because they have to be grown. But we work with a company called GS Long, a great chemical company, and they're able to procure them for us. So whatever chemical company, whether you're using Nutrient or GS, whoever you use, talk to them. They should be able to procure them. But I think they're produced out of Penticton, Canada, if I'm not mistaken about that. I love them. Sterile moss are awesome. The technology is great. I was just reading last week that this screwworm that's been coming up from Mexico and getting into the cattle industry, I learned just this week that they cured screwworm in the United States back in the 60s using this exact same mode of action. They used sterile screwworms and got them into the system and completely eradicated screwworm in the United States. And I've learned just in the last 2 months, just in the last 2 days, they've opened the border back up because they did the exact same thing again. They went down there and they introduced sterile screwworms into the system, and all it takes is breeding for a couple of generations and work those completely out of the system. And they're saying they're all on top of that problem again. I've seen it work for me. I love the sterile moss. Sarah, I hope you're able to get your hands on some. It works great. Absar Althoff says, what is your scab protection? We used to have scab here really, really bad. Climate change has kind of helped us out a little bit. It's brought us into more intensely, brought us out of what used to be a terrible scab area here in the Pacific Northwest. In other words, we don't really have it a lot anymore, but we still are prone to it in Red Delicious and some varieties, and so we follow a model. We've got a model here on Washington State University provides. It's a scab model. We follow that in the springtime. You really want to follow that at the beginning of the year in the spring. That's when the scab was prevalent for us. But we follow the model and we spray for it. We have fungicides that we spray. But yeah, it hasn't been a real problem for us probably about the last 15 years. Used to be a big issue for us. Hope that helps. Jerome Empey. Hey, Jerome. Let's see. What timing do you like to put out on mylar? Just talked about that. Nice to have you on board, Jerome. Yeah, I like to put it out 10 days before harvest this time of the year. But once I get past the intense heat, I like to put it out as soon as I can. So just talked about that quite a bit. Gower Yusuf says, best PGR for fruit elongation, that would be Promin or Type E. That PGR, that's the mode of action of that. It elongates cells and it elongates apples. So that would be Promin. You want to put that on 80% full bloom. All right, any more? We've got about 3 more and we're going to call it. Yeah, we're right at an hour. That seems to be how long this takes. So We're going to answer these 3 questions, and we'll call it a night. Fernando Mendevalion says, have you ever used Apogee or Regala on the upper third part of the cherry tree, trying to stop upper shoots or vegetative growths out of plants? The answer, Fernando, is I have played with Apogee on cherries. I had an opportunity to talk to some people that were growing UFO system. And I asked him, because he had some real tall shoots in the top, I said, have you considered using Apogee on these things? And he said, yes. As a matter of fact, I do use Apogee and it works great. And I've talked to someone else over at the university that told me that they play with Apogee quite a bit on cherries. So, yeah, I'm curious if you've tried that. But even though I haven't done it extensively in cherries, I've talked to a lot of people that have assured me that it works really well in cherries. So, yes. Rohan MR is on board. Adil Hussein Poder is on board. And Mark Rash is on board. Welcome, Mark. It's nice to have you on board tonight. Ball Creek Gill says, what post-harvest sprays do you recommend for cherries split over 2 applications in August and September? What post-harvest sprays do you recommend for cherries split over 2 applications, August and September? The only thing I really do on cherries, I used to do a lot of coppers on cherries. If I have bacterial canker, I'd probably do a late season Cassumin or a lime sulfur. I would do that only if I needed to. But the other thing that we've had to go to on cherries, we've had to continue to spray for leaf hoppers until the end of the season, because we found that leaf hoppers are a vector for little cherry disease and Western X. That's the bad guy, that's the culprit. And so we do have to continue to spray every 2 weeks post-harvest, probably 3 applications to go after leaf hoppers. So I hope that helps. That's really all I spray in cherries post-harvest. So Adil Hussein Patter says, is branch bending commercial methodology on Gala apples are very much required, or can we counter issues during winter pruning? Adil, you don't have to bend branches. You don't have to pull down branches. I really only teach formal systems on the channel, and I really only do formal systems in our orchards. I'm a big believer in formal systems, and that's what I really want to pass on to the next generation is the implementation of bud counting and using formal systems to produce a maximum quality apple. When you have an informal system, apples are blowing around and limbs are blowing around, and you might be able to get the production, but you'll never get the quality of apple that you need to meet your targets and your expectations. So I only teach formal systems, and in formal systems, you have to pull the apple down. Can you get away with a system where you don't pull the apple down? You bet. We did it for about 100 years. So you can do it, but I would go to a formal system. That's all I have. I want to thank the subscribers. We appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for turning in. I really enjoy this channel. Really enjoy the interaction and the questions. Again, if you could click and let us know where you're from, we really enjoy that. And I appreciate the camaraderie. I want to thank my wife, Marlon. We were able to have a good vacation and get away and spend some time in the wilderness and on a jet boat and a lot of fishing and had a good time, but it's nice to be farming again. So for me tomorrow morning, we're going to get the crews out there and get our feet wet, start picking some apples. So I wish you a great week and hope you have a great week in the fields.